The cafe was alive with quiet murmurs, the soft clinking of silverware against porcelain, and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows, painting golden hues over the neatly arranged tables. Caleb Foster sat across from Vanessa Brooks, sipping his black coffee with the quiet patience of a man who had already made up his mind. He could tell she hadn't. Vanessa sighed, her manicured fingers tracing the rim of her cappuccino cup. "I just need time to figure out what I want," she said, her voice measured. It sounded like a request, but Caleb knew better. It was a declaration, a warning that she intended to explore her options while keeping him in the background, a safety net for when she was done wandering. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying the woman who had once held his full devotion. Her auburn hair was styled to perfection, her complexion flawless, her confidence unwavering. She carried herself like a prize, the kind of woman who expected men to orbit around her. For a long time, Caleb had been one of them, the patient, devoted boyfriend who let her take the lead. Not anymore. He took another slow sip of his coffee, savoring the bitter taste before setting the cup down with deliberate calm. "All right," he said simply. Vanessa blinked, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. "All right," he shrugged. "Take all the time you need." Her lips parted slightly, confusion flickering in her dark brown eyes. She had expected resistance, a fight, some grand gesture to convince her to stay. But Caleb wasn't giving her that. She crossed her arms, leaning forward. I don't want to break up or anything. I just want options," Caleb finished for her. A faint flush crept up her neck, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I just think it's fair to explore. I don't want to look back and wonder if I settled too soon." Caleb nodded as if he understood. Maybe a younger version of himself would have been crushed by those words. But at 32, he had learned a simple truth. When someone asks for space, they aren't expecting you to actually give it to them. "I get it," he said, reaching for his phone. Vanessa watched him with mild suspicion as he tapped the screen. A moment later, her phone vibrated on the table. She frowned, picking it up. "You blocked me?" Caleb finished the last sip of his coffee and stood, slipping his wallet from his pocket. He placed a crisp $20 bill on the table, enough to cover both their drinks. "I'm giving you exactly what you asked for, Vanessa," he said, tucking his wallet back into his pocket. "All the time in the world." She stared at him, stunned. "You're seriously blocking me?" Just like that. A slow smirk curved his lips, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "No hard feelings," he said. "But I don't do second place." Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, but Caleb had already turned away, walking out of the cafe without a second glance. She sat frozen, staring at the empty space he left behind. For the first time in her life, she realized she had overplayed her hand. At first, she wasn't worried. She convinced herself that Caleb was just being dramatic, that his little act of cutting her off was temporary. A moment of bruised ego. He'd come around like he always did. After all, Caleb wasn't the type to disappear completely. He was steady, predictable, the kind of man who always checked in, even after an argument. So she waited. The first week passed, and she kept an eye on her notifications, expecting his name to pop up. A simple "hey" or "thinking about you." But nothing came. By the second week, curiosity turned into mild annoyance. She tried to view his profile only to see, user not found. Confused, she opened Instagram. Then Facebook. Blocked. A small, irritated huff escaped her lips. Was he really going to be childish about this? Still, she wasn't worried. Not yet. By the third week, Vanessa started showing up in places where she knew he might be. The gym they used to go to, the bar where he played pool with his friends. But every time she looked, Caleb was nowhere to be found. She casually asked one of his buddies if he had been around. The guy just shrugged. "Oh, Caleb? Haven't seen him much. Think he's been traveling." Traveling. That was new. Vanessa frowned as she scrolled through her alternate Instagram account, the one Caleb hadn't blocked. His profile was public, but nothing gave her the answers she was looking for. A picture of him at a rooftop lounge, drink in hand. Another at a tropical beach, sunglasses on, shirtless, looking better than she remembered. He looked good. Relaxed. Unbothered. She scrolled through the comments. Women were responding, flirting. And the worst part? Caleb was responding back. A tight, unfamiliar feeling curled in her stomach. By the 5th week, Vanessa did something she had never done before. She called him. Her fingers hovered over the dial button for a moment before she pressed it, expecting it to go straight to voicemail. It didn't. The line rang once. Twice. Her pulse quickened. Then, the number you are trying to reach is no longer in service. A sinking sensation spread through her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Caleb was supposed to get over his little tantrum and reach out. He was supposed to miss her, wonder what she was doing, check in just to see how things were. That's how these things worked. That's how it had always worked. But this was different. By the second month, her options had turned out to be a joke. Mike, the guy she had been flirting with, turned out to be an arrogant player juggling 5 different women at once. Tyler had seemed promising, until she realized he had no ambition, no drive, no real future. One by one, every man she had put Caleb on hold for turned out to be exactly what Caleb never was. Temporary. And suddenly, she started remembering all the little things she had taken for granted. The way Caleb always made sure she got home safely, even when she insisted she didn't need him to. The way he paid attention. How he always noticed when she was stressed and brought her a latte from her favorite cafe without her even asking. How he never played games. Never made her guess where she stood. She had walked away from stability, thinking she could do better. But better never came. And now, for the first time in her life, she was the one being ignored. By the 3rd month, Vanessa had stopped lying to herself. Caleb wasn't coming back. At first, she told herself he was just being stubborn, trying to prove a point. That he was dragging out his little disappearing act to make her sweat. But now, she could feel it in her gut. He was truly gone. And that terrified her more than anything. One evening, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. The last text she had sent him weeks ago still showed delivered. No response. That morning, she had checked his social media again. A new post. Caleb, at a rooftop restaurant, dressed sharply in a tailored blazer. His arm draped casually around a woman. Not just any woman. Hannah Reed. Vanessa's stomach twisted as she clicked on the woman's profile. She was gorgeous. But it wasn't just her looks. It was the effortless way she carried herself. No excessive selfies, no filters, no need for validation. She exuded quiet confidence. The kind of beauty that didn't have to try. Vanessa kept scrolling. And for the first time in her life, she felt something she never had before. The comment was simple. A night to remember. Hannah had posted it beneath a photo. One where she sat beside Caleb at a dimly lit rooftop bar, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. The city skyline glowed behind them, the moment captured in golden, effortless elegance. But it wasn't just the picture that made Vanessa's stomach tighten. It was Caleb's response. More to come. Vanessa stared at the words, her breath hitching. It wasn't just what he had said. It was how he had said it. Caleb had never been the type to flaunt a relationship online. Even in the nearly 2 years they had spent together, he had been private, affectionate in ways that didn't need an audience. A hand on the small of her back, his jacket draped over her shoulders when it got too cold, the quiet ways he had always been there. But now he was showing up differently. With Hannah, he wasn't just present, he was intentional. He was acting like a man who had moved on. Vanessa set her phone down, pressing her fingers to her temples. She hated this feeling, this gnawing, suffocating regret. She had been so sure, so absolutely convinced that Caleb would always be an option. That no matter how long she took to figure things out, he would be waiting in the background, patient and steady as he had always been. But now, it was her checking his profile. Her waiting, hoping for some sign that he wasn't as far gone as he seemed. Before she could stop herself, she reached for her phone again. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed the words. Vanessa, hey, I miss you. Can we talk? She stared at the screen, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the empty space where the typing bubble should have appeared. Seconds passed. Then a full minute. She waited, willing a response into existence. But nothing came. A cold realization settled over her. She had expected him to be the safety net, the backup plan, the one who would always be there if her options didn't work out. Instead, she was the one left behind. She had never known what it felt like to be truly ignored. In the past, she had always been the one with control. She had decided when to respond, when to keep someone waiting, when to make an ex regret losing her. But now, as she sat there refreshing the chat every few minutes, she finally understood what it meant to be forgotten. Hours passed. Then a full day. Still nothing from Caleb. Her pride told her to let it go, to pretend she hadn't sent that message. But the anxiety in her chest wouldn't let her. She needed to hear his voice. She needed to undo what she had done. Desperation clawed at her as she scrolled through their old photos, something she had never thought she would do. There they were, dinner dates, weekend getaways, the candid moments when he had caught her laughing. Caleb had always been the type to take pictures, not to post, but to keep. He used to say he liked remembering the little things. Had he deleted them already? Had he erased her as easily as he had blocked her? Her fingers moved quickly, typing before she could second-guess herself. Vanessa, Caleb, please. I just want to talk. This time, she didn't even get the chance to wait. The message turned blue for a second, delivered, and then, just as quickly, it turned gray. A small gasp escaped her lips. She gripped the phone too tightly, heart hammering. He had seen it. And then, just like that, he had blocked her. Vanessa felt her chest tighten, disbelief washing over her in a suffocating wave. This couldn't be happening. She had just lost Caleb. Panic set in. She went to Instagram. His profile was gone. She tried to call. The line didn't even ring. It was as if he had disappeared off the face of the earth. Except she knew he hadn't. He was still out there, still living his life, just without her. For the first time in a long time, Vanessa felt powerless. She had spent years believing she was irreplaceable, that men would always orbit around her, waiting for her to choose them. But Caleb, he had walked away without hesitation. And the worst part, he hadn't even looked back. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't the kind of woman who cried over a man. But then again, Caleb had never been just any man. And now he was gone. Vanessa sat alone in her apartment, the silence pressing in like a weight she couldn't shake. Outside, the city was alive, cars honking, people laughing on the sidewalk below. But none of it reached her. All she could hear was the emptiness where Caleb used to be. She had never thought this was how it would end. Caleb wasn't supposed to be the one to move on first. She had assumed he would linger in the background, waiting for her to decide he was what she truly wanted. But 3 months had passed, and reality had made itself painfully clear. She wasn't the one in control anymore. She had tried everything. After being blocked on text and social media, she had resorted to mutual friends, slipping his name into casual conversation, hoping someone, anyone, would offer a clue about where he had gone. But the response was always the same. Oh, Caleb? He's doing great. Traveling. Dating someone new. He seems happier than ever. Happier than ever. The words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. One night, against her better judgment, she found herself parked outside the bar they used to go to. The one where Caleb had always let her steal fries from his plate without complaint. She wasn't proud of it, but she needed to see him. Just once. She needed proof that he was really gone. And then she saw them. Caleb, sitting at a corner table, his arm resting comfortably around her. Hannah Reed. The woman Vanessa had already grown to resent, even though she had never met her. But seeing them together now, it was worse than she had imagined. Hannah was laughing, her head tilted slightly toward Caleb. And Caleb, he was looking at her in a way Vanessa recognized all too well. It was the way he used to look at her. Like she was the only person in the room. Like he was exactly where he wanted to be. Vanessa's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to watch. Hannah wasn't trying too hard. She wasn't clinging to Caleb's arm or checking to see who was watching her. She was just there, effortlessly comfortable, without a trace of insecurity. And Caleb, he was the same, relaxed, confident, happy. The finality of it hit her like a brick. He wasn't coming back. He had given her all the space she had asked for, but not in the way she had expected. Instead of waiting for her to decide, he had taken her at her word. He had let her go, and she had no one to blame but herself. Vanessa turned away before either of them could see her. For the first time in her life, she was the one left behind. And she knew there was no fixing it.